Welcome back, everyone. We are now moving to our next video in this unit where we're thinking through this deeper drill that we're doing into the theory of behavior in markets. So just to remind you where we were, we started by looking at markets and market price mechanisms, and we looked at this idea of market equilibrium. And now we're saying, okay, let's step back and look a bit more closely at this idea of market equilibrium by looking at the two sides of the market, demand and supply. So we're looking at demand. And we paid some attention to what I like to think of as the environment of demand. And these are the ideas such as perfectly competitive markets. Adjustment times are such that you can look at one market at a time and you can take your time to figure out how feedback loops work out, that individual consumers are rational, that people work based on utility and they try to maximize utility. That's our concept of rationality, subject to their budgets, their constraints, and that they are all price takers. So that what they're looking at is what is the relationship between marginal utility and price, because everyone is a price taker in a perfectly competitive market. So we've got a bunch of assumptions about the environment in which people make decisions. So that's one. Competitive markets, free entry, exit, price takers, all of that. And the behavioral factors that influence how people make decisions. This is the rational agent, the utility maximizer, the person who's focused only on their own self-interest and on maximizing their own needs. We can have debates about all these assumptions. We can have debates about the environment of decision making. Is it competitive? Are there major players who influence the market really deeply? Are there factors coming from market interaction, so the ceteris is not paribus? So you have to think through what's happening in multiple markets and not just one. You can have questions about that environment. You can have questions about whether that environment captures the consequences of people's actions. But you can also have questions about the actual process in this environment that people make decisions. Is it true that you maximize this thing called utility? Is it true that you are a rational agent? Is it true that you don't care for others? Right? So we have that set of questions, and one of the philosophical questions we raised in the last video was the status, for example, of this philosophical concept called utility. What does that mean? What exactly is this thing we're all maximizing? One. But we can also think through this concept of maximization leading us to the idea. And this idea is kind of useful. No matter what your critiques of other ideas are, you might still find this idea useful. Marginal decision making. Now, for those of you who are really good at math, I was, and I am, and I enjoy it. And those of you who have kind of like fun doing equations and whatnot. Marginality is an interesting concept because it's really nice for anybody who has fun with calculus. I like calculus. I've really enjoyed calculus. I enjoyed calculus in high school, 11th, 12th grade. I enjoyed it through college. And calculus is about derivatives, and derivatives are about, and now let's remember what that word derivative means. It means that if A depends on B, The derivative is something that tells me how A depends on B, right? So derivative functions are functions that tell me something a little bit more about the relationship. It turns out this idea of marginal maps onto the idea of derivative, but it's important to know what this idea of marginal means in economic terms. Because if we don't know what it means in economic terms, and we're very good at calculus, then what we've got is we're really smart at calculus, we have no idea what it means in economics, garbage in, garbage out. We can take a derivative, we have no idea why we're taking it, when we're taking it, and what it means. We'd be falling back into that problem of this sort of anxiety about math that I talked about earlier, that we live in an enumerate society where we think that more numbers is better, even if we don't understand what the numbers mean. And we don't want to end up there. So this unit is about what this word means. It's not about whether you can take a derivative, calculate a slope, figure out what the marginal x, y, z is. It's about what does that mean? And what marginal means literally is extra. We had this in a previous lecture, so this is just a reminder. Next on the margin. And it's an interesting concept, because what it means is that the way I imagine decision making is that I imagine decision making as happening at the level of one production unit at a time. And think of how I've talked about supply and demand all this way through. The first rows, the second rows, the third rows. How many roses do you want? Do you want 3? How about one more rose, madame? 4. How about the 5th rose? Would you be interested in the 6th rose? A whole dozen, right? So we're thinking in what I want to think of as volumetric modes, and we're thinking that volumes are measured unit by unit by unit. So the first question we're going to ask ourselves is how useful this idea is, because there are things where, for example, I know I don't think on the margin. If my doctor tells me that I have to take 2 pills a day, 3 times a day, I don't think by the extra pill. I don't decide 1 pill more, 1 pill less, how much for the 6th pill, how much for the 4th pill. I think in terms of 2 pills a day, 3 times a day. I think in terms of an actual, complete volume of product. I don't actually think in terms of margins. Similarly with, say, something like cars, I don't actually think in terms of the next quarter of a car. How much would you pay for half a house? How much would you pay for a quarter yard in a house? How much would you pay for a 1/5 of a room? There might be places where you do not make decisions at that unit level. 1 more, 2 more. In those places, we're going to have to think through how decision making operates. Sometimes it doesn't operate like this. This goes back to my question about how comfortable are you with this idea of utils or utility or decision making and rationality of people thinking of 1 unit more, 1 unit more, 1 unit more. Sometimes we don't think like that. But for lots of things, we do. I do actually think of 1 unit more when I'm thinking, do I want to buy another 1/4 pound of cheese? Do I want to buy a gallon of milk? Do I just want to buy another pint of milk, a 1/4 pint of milk, right? 1 carat, 2 carat, 5 carat, I can actually think in that way. So the first thing we need to know is that marginality is a really smart concept. It's not a concept that applies to everything, and it's a concept that occasionally we're going to say, it doesn't work that way. But for some important things, including, by the way, pretty serious things like labor market, how many hours do you want to work this week? Do you want to work 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours? Many of us do make decisions by the hour when we talk to our workplace managers, right? I got exams this week. I don't know. I got childcare issues. Maybe I'll work 1 more hour, but I don't think I want to work 3 more hours, right? We actually do make pretty serious decisions, including how many hours to work, how much basic necessities like food to buy on the margin. Some units are not divisible so easily. Transport. I mean, if I was in a place with good public transport, I could think of the extra bus ride. Maybe with Uber, Lyft, I can think about the extra lift. But often if I'm thinking of actually acquiring household capital goods, I'm not probably going to think of a quarter room or half a car, right? So there's places where it applies. And it turns out many of the places it applies are pretty massive. So major markets often operate with decision making by households and by firms on the margin. And the idea of marginality is that I'm operating unit by unit by unit. I'm asking myself, how much am I getting from this extra unit on the margin? Extra. Next. How much am I benefiting from this extra unit? Extra. Next on the margin. And how much am I going to give up? Opportunity cost to get it. If what I get from that extra unit is more, if the marginal return, whether it's utility, revenue, whatever, if the marginal utility, the marginal return to that extra next unit exceeds the marginal opportunity cost, whether it is from households who are like, what else can I spend the money on? Which is essentially the price of the good. That's what you're paying for it, and that's what you can say, hey, instead of paying so much for that apple, I can put that money somewhere else. Or it could be marginal costs from a producer's idea. What you're thinking in marginal terms is this next unit. How much am I getting from it? How much is it going to cost, opportunity cost me? Next unit. And if I benefit, I will do it. I will buy that next unit. I will produce that next unit. So marginality is a concept that I'm going to use for both the demand and the supply side. So the demand side, I've been using marginal utility. On the supply side, I'm going to use marginal revenue and marginal cost. But in each case, my decision making is this idea that I'm going unit by unit by unit. For a lot of things in our life, that works really well. And if we feel that what is being captured in utility, marginal utility, or in marginal cost, how much is it going to cost you as a firm? So we feel that the cost for a firm actually capture things like environment, this, that, and the other. It's a really good system. So a lot of the queries are not going to be at the level of, do people do this? It's going to be more at the level of, is doing it this way either a good description of what people do? Or B, are there, and we'll come to this in the third section, externalities, public goods, impacts on other people, failures of equilibrium, where this way of decision making doesn't work. So just remember, there's a social environment in which decision making happens, competitive markets, and there is a behavioral decision making process. And that behavioral decision making process we're going to call marginality. Our next unit will apply this, which you already learned for the consumer, to firms. And we're going to see how firms also use marginal decision making. Thank you.